Mr. Speaker. What a thing to witness. What a thing to witness. This coalition collude to cover up and take a top-down action to force through a top-down bill, which we just all did see. But Conservatives won't stop the fight for the people that we represent and for the best interests of all Canadians. So to review, from Friday, the Liberals rammed through first the Atlantic Offshore Bill C-49, which includes 33 references to the 5-year-old unconstitutional law C-69 that the Liberals haven't fixed yet. And C-49, by the way, triples the timeline for offshore renewables in the Atlantic provinces. And then the Just Transition Bill C-50, after fewer than 9 and 8 hours total debate from all MPs on each. Then, on October 30th, the NDP Liberals tried to dictate every aspect of how the committee would deal with those bills, reversed their own order to hold back Bill C-49, and spent a month preoccupied with censorship and exclusion of Conservatives like the members from Fort Saskatchewan Sherwood Park and Peace River Westlog. The extraordinary motion being debated and the debate shut down today means the committee will be limited to less than 2 hours of scrutiny on Bill C-50. We'll hear from no witnesses, no impacted workers or businesses, no experts, no provincial or regional representatives, no economists, no Indigenous communities, no ministers and no officials. And MPs will only have one partial day each to review and debate this bill at the next 2 stages. Listen, I never thought I would spend so much of the last 8 years having to count on senators to really do the full scrutiny the NDP Liberals' laws require after the fact, because the coalition circumvents elected MPs on the front end so many times. You'd think after the Supreme Court absolutely skewered them all on C-69 that both the NDPs and the Liberals supported so thoroughly that you'd see a change of behavior and attitude, but no, not these guys. They're reckless, ever undaunted in their top-down authority. Now the NDP Liberals will say the government's been working on it for years. They've engaged unions all the time. So what's the holdup? You heard that from Timmins James Bay earlier, even though what he didn't admit was that at the time the committee was studying the concept of the just transition, and the NDP Liberals moved forward with announcing their legislation before it reported anyway. They'll say, let's just get this done so Bill C-50 can give the reskilling, upskilling, and job training that workers need and want when they all lose their jobs because of government mandates. A couple points here. First, it sure is clear the NDP Liberals have been working together on something for a while since they were all together to announce the bill. Second, everybody needs to know there isn't actually a single skills or job program anywhere in this bill at all, none. And 3, cooking up something behind closed doors and then being outraged and cracking down on the official opposition when we suggest we should all actually just do our jobs, speak to represent our constituents, most importantly, let Canadians speak so we can actually hear from them on the actual bill, and then analyze it comprehensively, propose changes and improvements. Well, that top-down central planning approach sounds an awful lot just like the way we've characterized Bill C-50, the Just Transition itself, that's caused some outrage in the last few days. So I'll say it again, and I'll make the case. Bill C-50, the Just Transition, aims to centrally plan the top-down restructuring of the fundamentals and the foundations of Canada's economy. It aims to redistribute wealth. It's a globally conceived, planned, and imposed agenda. It's, in fact, a major focus of a globalist gathering that's going on right now, the same kind of gathering where it started years ago. Now, I confess I don't really get all the consternation about stating that fact, since the definition of globalism is, quote, the operation or planning of economic and foreign policy on a global basis. That's, of course, exactly what's happening with the Just Transition and the many international bodies that bring together politicians, policy advocates, and wealthy elites from around the world to plan economic and foreign policy globally. I mean, I'd note that's, of course, while they all contribute significantly to increasing global emissions to get there and back, while they dream up more schemes to tell the folks back home that they can't drive or live in a house or any land or farm, or for who can afford it to fly, or, you know, that we all have to eat insects. Well, they all do the exact opposite, even while they bring home agendas that will make essentials in daily life so expensive for all the rest of us that we will have no choice, even when we have no options. Globalism is literally the function of numerous organizations, all explicitly heavily focused on imposing the the just transition for years, and today it's linked to the concept of the global citizen, of post-national states with no independent identities, just like the current Prime Minister said of Canada when he was elected. That's what's happening at Cop28 right now. It's in the UN 2030 plan. It's a top priority of lots of many well-known and respected gatherings like the Organization for Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation and others. It's bizarre the NDP Liberals deny and attack all this now when globalism is obviously implicit in their ideology, and I thought that they're proud of it. So they've all been outraged about this, but I guess, the truth hurts, and anger is often a cover for hurt, so maybe that's what all their rage is about. Or maybe their issue is that I call it Soviet-style central planning. Except, of course, Bill C-50 really does create a government-appointed committee to advise the minister, and then the minister will appoint another committee to plan the economy. This bill doesn't mandate any of that will happen through openness and transparency. Neither of the committees will report to either Parliament or directly to Canadians along the way. I guess the coalition wants to say it's a win that the reports will be tabled in the House of Commons, but of course that doesn't guarantee any kind of debate or accountability, and they're proving their true colors through how they're handling the bill now, especially since it's clear they want to impose it all with little challenge and almost no scrutiny from beginning to end. And right, there in the summary, in black and white for all the world to see, when will those plans from the government committees for Canada's economy be imposed? Every 5 years. I mean, that's literally the Soviet-preferred time frame for central planning. But somehow the NDP Liberals are shocked and outraged, even though the lead NDP Liberal minister, who's at a global conference right now about the progress of the global just transition, is a guy who's a self-declared proud socialist out of his own mouth in this very chamber. And there are no costs outlined either in this bill, even though it will obviously cost taxpayers, just like the NDP Liberals' mega sole source contracts for their buddies, infrastructure banks and housing funds that cost billions of tax dollars and neither build infrastructure in our houses, only bureaucracy, hundreds of thousands on consultants to tell the government to use less consultants. There will be a cost to create and maintain the Just Transition Partnership Council on pages 6 to 10 that will advise the minister, and then the secretariat the minister has to create. But this bill doesn't tell Canadians about any of the costs taxpayers will have to pay for all of that upfront and after. So it's quite something to see the inclusion of the words accountability and transparency in the long title of Bill C-50, since it's all actually about behind closed doors government-appointed committees and a minister that will cook up central plans to central plan to central plan, mandates neither transparency nor accountability directly to Canadians or through their MPs at all, and doesn't include an actual outline for one or any kind of skills or job training program at all. But that's how this whole thing was baked in the first place. Their rushed top-down schedule today is to ram it through with as little analysis from MPs and input from Canadians as possible. It's a little silly for the NDP Liberals to all be mad now that the official opposition actually wants all MPs to do our jobs, to debate, consult, amend, and approve legislation, especially such a wide-ranging and significant one like Bill C-50 and the economic transition it imposes. And what about the tens of thousands of Canadians whose jobs were devastated by these NDP Liberals' fast-track coal transition, which the Environment Commissioner said it was a total failure and left 3,400 of Canadian workers in about a dozen communities completely behind. But this government says, just trust us, for them to engineer an economic transition for 2.7 million Canadians and the entire country. Or what about the nearly 40,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador who were all put out of work completely when they were promised the government would help them transition in the largest industrial shutdown in Canadian history at the time from cod? It was a disaster for all of them, their loved ones, their communities, their province. I hope they see Bill C-50 as the end of oil and gas Canada bill that it is, too, because, of course, the impact of the oil and gas sector in Newfoundland and Labrador is a quarter of the province's total GDP, higher than Alberta's. It's 40% of Newfoundland and Labrador's exports, and 6,000 people in Newfoundland and Labrador in the oil and gas service and supply sector have lost their jobs already just in the last 3 years because of the uncertainty and the NDP Liberals' anti-energy policies. The government's intent now through C50 is like nothing Canada has ever seen before, and Canadians can be forgiven for knowing that this won't go well. What's truly bizarre about all this, though, is despite the NDP Liberals' collusion on the bill for about 2 years, I should note here that other opposition MPs like us don't actually get to see the bills until the government actually tables them. And despite what I hear really were some roundtables and consultations meetings, there isn't actually any tangible delivery of what its own proponents say it does for skills and job training. It's not in here anywhere, which is one of the many reasons Conservatives say the Natural Resources Committee must actually do its job and, most importantly, must hear from all the Canadians that it will impact. Both union and non-union workers and union leaders should be outraged about it. What really did happen with all the time and effort and money that was apparently sunk into developing it behind closed doors between 2021 and 2023? Since the bill sets up committees to plan from on high, why the heck did all of this require a law in the first place? Government and unions and businesses consult, develop plans, and report. Like, okay, go ahead. What's holding you up? Why is Bill C-50 even required for that work to happen if they all want it to? And how is this actually all the Liberal NDP government has come up with? How is any Canadian supposed to trust these guys to deliver on anything when this took all that time, meeting, and tax dollars, but there isn't even an actual plan or program in it, and it won't be for 2 years out until they even get a recommendation? It's sort of like the ITCs that the NDP Liberals keep talking about and keep bragging about as if they're doing anything in our economy right now, but actually they don't even exist at all in Canada yet. Of course, Conservatives and more Canadians know Bill C-50 really is all about the just transition, which really is all about ending oil and gas in Canada as fast as they possibly can, which the NDP Liberals have shown repeatedly after 8 years. A government, of course, that didn't want to kill the sector and all the livelihoods it sustains really wouldn't do anything differently from what these guys have done and continue to do. I mean, everyone can read it. In the 11 pages and the 21 clauses of Bill C-50, there is not one single instance of a skills or job training program. That's the truth. And now, because of the NDP Liberals, neither union nor non-union workers, in fact, no workers, no contractors, no business owners, no investors, no Indigenous owners, partners, or workers or contractors, nobody will be able to speak or be able to be heard by MPs at any remaining stage of this top-down agenda for this top-down bill. So I'll talk about some of those workers now. A couple of points. One, the reality is the biggest growth of good-paying union jobs in Canada right now is actually created by the big multinational oil and gas companies expanding and ramping up new oil, gas, and petrochemical projects in Alberta. By the same companies that made Alberta Canada's far and away leader in clean tech, renewable, and alternative energy for at least 30 years. And for the record, today, Alberta is again far and away Canada's leader in renewable energy. In fact, the investment commitments for renewables and future fuel development in Alberta have doubled to nearly $50 billion of private sector money planned, ready to invest in Alberta, since the Premier paused to set the conditions to guarantee consultation, certainty, and confidence for all Albertans while the regulator keeps taking applications. But the NDP Liberals won't admit that to you either. Yet this is where they're at. It's the major oil and gas companies leading the creation of new union jobs in Canada, but it's actually the very sector that the Just Transition agenda will shut down first. The main thing every union worker needs is actually a job. That's what's at risk. And third, the Anti-Energy Coalition also refuses to admit the fact that in Canada, it's traditional oil and gas, oil sands, and pipeline companies that are the far and away top investors in the private sector for decades and today in clean tech, environmental innovation, and renewables, among all the private sectors in Canada, excluding governments and utilities. Just like how oil and gas is still right now the top private sector investor and top export in all of Canada's economy, and the truth is nothing is posed to match or beat it anytime soon. Nothing comes close. The stakes of the anti-energy agenda imposed by the costly coalition on Canada are exceptionally grave. Some facts about the businesses that will be hurt and the workers that will be hurt the most by the Just Transition agenda, Bill C-50. In Canada's oil and gas sector, 93% of those companies have only up to 99 employees. They're small businesses. 63% of those businesses are considered micro businesses with fewer than 5 employees. That's the truth about workers and businesses in Canada's oil and gas sector, especially the homegrown Canadian-based ones. Those aren't union businesses, although their jobs are also sustainable, and they are also higher paying with reliable long-term benefits than most jobs in most sectors. While large employers with over 500 people on payroll account for just over 1%, that's it, not 2%, just over 1% of the total oil and gas extraction businesses in Canada, that's it. Now, those are the businesses that are mostly union workplaces and support more union jobs than the rest of the sector, but they are also among the first businesses that Bill C-50's agenda will kill, and that after 8 years, the NDP Liberals have been incrementally damaging. So again, no oil and gas sector, no businesses, no jobs, unions or otherwise, that's the truth. But it also means higher costs and less reliable power, especially where most Canadians have no affordable options, like rural, remote, northern, Atlantic, prairie and Atlantic, and Indigenous communities, fewer businesses and jobs there, less money for government programs, since currently the oil and gas sector pays the most of all to all 3 levels of government, and less private sector money for clean tech and innovation. But which workers do the NDP Liberals already know that their unfair, unjust transition Bill C-50 will hurt the most? Well, if you can believe it, visible minority Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. Both ethnically diverse and Indigenous Canadians are more highly represented in the energy sector than in any other sector in Canada's economy. But the internal government leaked memo that I'm assuming they've all saw says they are expected to face higher job disruptions than any other workers, and they will have more trouble finding new opportunities. They will end up in lower paying, more precarious jobs with fewer opportunities, as will be the case for all the workers who will lose their livelihoods to this radical anti-energy global agenda. So Canadians will know instantly, of course, from these numbers that the top targets to be crushed by Bill C-50 are those 93% and those 64% of small and micro Canadian businesses, workers, and all their contractors. Bill C-50 doesn't contemplate them at all. There's no consideration about all the non-union workers who will all lose their jobs in the Just Transition agenda, the homegrown Canadian-based known businesses with Canadian workers who have been doing their parts on environmental stewardship, innovation, clean tech, actual emissions reductions, Indigenous partnerships to the highest standards in Canada, and therefore to the highest standards in the world, just like the big guys here. Since the NDP Liberals refuse to allow it, I spoke with one of those, my office spoke with one of those union workers last week from Saskatchewan. He said, I am not happy with the fact that I will be displaced out of a job from a federal mandate. No matter what the NDP Liberals try to call it or say about it now, he's got it right. That's exactly what will happen to that union worker. There's nothing, not a single thing about all the non-union workers who will obviously all lose their jobs first, nor any space for union workers who don't want the transition accelerated by the anti-energy, anti-private sector. NDP Liberals, there's nothing about the communities and the people who will be damaged the most, nothing about what sector actually can and will replace the jobs and economic contributions of the oil and gas sector, because of course right now there's nothing that will or can, and nothing about all those hundreds of thousands of oil and gas union workers whose employers will also be put out of work quickly, as is the actual aim of Bill C-50. No wonder the NDP Liberals want to silence Canadians and do this all quickly and behind closed doors, since they too must know common sense Canadians can see right through them, and they're running out of time. A last point about the chair of natural resources from Calgary Skyview. You know, when I congratulated him on his recent appointment, I said to him the Liberals have done him no favors by putting him there to help impose their agenda. The people of Calgary Skyview will render their decision, as is their right, like it is for all Canadians, in the next election. But I suspect at the end of all of this, just like I warned a former natural resources minister from Alberta in our last emergency committee meeting about the TMX, which still isn't built, in the summer heading into the 2019 election, that his constituents would see his betrayal, I suspect the people of Calgary Skyview will be the same in this instance. You'll notice that member, that former natural resources minister from Alberta, wasn't sent back here. And in hindsight, I suspect it won't be worth it for the member for Calgary Skyview, but we all make choices and we all face consequences. So I move, seconded by the member for Coast of Bays, Central Notre Dame, that the motion be amended by A, replacing paragraph A with the following. During the consideration of the bill by the Standing Committee on Natural Resources, the Minister of Natural Resources and its officials be ordered to appear as witnesses for no less than 2 hours. Members of the committee submit their lists of suggested witnesses concerning the bill to the clerk, and that the chair and clerk create witness panels which reflect the representation of the parties on the committee. And once complete, that the chair begins scheduling those meetings. 3, a press release be issued for the study of the bill, inviting written submissions from the public and establishing a deadline for those submissions. And B, deleting paragraphs B and C. And every member of this chamber has a right to an ability to prove that they actually support democracy by supporting our amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.